Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, February 9, 2026. Ghislaine Maxwell, serving a prison sentence for conspiring with Jeffrey Epstein to abuse young women, pleads the Fifth Amendment and refuses to answer questions from the House Oversight Committee about who else may have been involved. Democrats say she's holding out for a pardon from President Donald Trump. Today is the first day members of Congress can view the unredacted versions of Epstein files the Justice Department has released. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from New York, top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, says there are redactions that do not make sense to him. Homeland Security Department funding runs out at the end of the week, but no word yet if Republicans and Democrats will reach an agreement on immigration enforcement reforms to avoid another partial government shutdown. The House today takes up a bipartisan housing affordability bill. Vice President JD Vance visits Armenia, while a bipartisan Senate delegation lands in Greenland. Plus, the FCC Commissioner Anna Gomez warns about media ownership consolidation. President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission meets on confronting anti-Semitism. And as NASA prepares to launch a new crew to the International Space Station, questions about being ready to handle emergencies like the one that led to the first ever medical evacuation recently. Associated Press writing that lawmakers tried Monday to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, but the former girlfriend and confidant of Jeffrey Epstein invoked her Fifth Amendment rights to avoid answering questions that would be incriminating. Maxwell was questioned during a video call to the federal prison camp in Texas, where she's serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking. She's come under new scrutiny as lawmakers try to investigate how Epstein, a well-connected financier, was able to sexually abuse underage girls for years. That was from Associated Press. After House Oversight and Government Reform Committee members came out to speak with reporters, first the chair, James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, joined by Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona.
Was Ghislaine Maxwell put under pressure to stay silent today?
Well, I have no idea.
Is that your suspicion?
How would I have no idea. I mean, she was given an opportunity. We would have brought her in months ago, but she's indicated she was going to plead the Fifth, and unfortunately, she had an opportunity today to answer questions that every American has, questions that would be very important in this investigation, and she chose to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights.
Mr. Chairman, clarify what her lawyer said about President Trump and Clinton, and do you think that there's anything more to do with Ghislaine Maxwell now that she pled the Fifth?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Just to be clear, what her attorney said, Maxwell didn't say. Her attorney said that she would answer questions if she were granted clemency by the President Trump, and that she went on to say about Clinton and
but he went on to expand that. The other thing is he pointed out a number of times that she has a habeas corpus petition pending for a new trial and release, and that's why she is not going to answer questions.
Mr. Chairman. I know that those conversations are ongoing. They would like them to be public. Is your understanding still that we're looking at those same February dates and they're going to be private?
Yeah, that's what they agreed to, and they will be public, just like this will be public hopefully very soon. We've released every transcript and every video and audio of every deposition we've done since I've been chairman of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, does the committee have any plans to subpoena Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, given the revelations?
We're going to try to get these 5 nailed down. We've got a lot of very important people we're trying to bring in to answer questions. We don't want to do anything to jeopardize the 5 that we have on the book. So we'll see what happens here, and we'll move forward.
Do you have concerns?
We're interested in talking to anyone that might have any information that would help us get justice for the survivors. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On the disagreement with the Clintons about closed-door videotape testimony versus public hearing, are you concerned that this will be enough to restart contempt proceedings, or do you think you'll come to a resolution?
I mean, they said they would. They agreed to a standard deposition. That's what a standard deposition is. Every time I've come out here for a press gaggle with you all, we've had a standard deposition. So this is how depositions work, and it will be made public. So they want a public deposition. This is what they're going to get.
Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, joined by committee member Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, in the House office building hallway outside the committee room where Ghislaine Maxwell testified briefly by video from prison about Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, there was a question there. This from the New York Times coverage. Lutnick claimed in a podcast interview last year that he stopped associating with Jeffrey Epstein in 2005. But documents released by the Justice Department show that Lutnick planned a visit to Epstein's private island in 2012, years later. Some Democrats on the Oversight Committee also spoke to reporters after Ghislaine Maxwell pleaded the Fifth, beginning with James Walkinshaw of Virginia.
Ghislaine Maxwell is a monster. She facilitated, aided, and abetted Epstein's crimes, engaged in those crimes. She was the enforcer who threatened the victims and the survivors of those crimes. And today we looked into the eyes of that monster in the deposition. What we did not get were any substantive answers to the questions that were asked that would advance our investigation, to help us learn who were the other men involved in these crimes, to help us learn who were the others who knew about these crimes, to help us learn what exactly was said between Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell that led her to be transferred to a minimum security prison. What we did get was another episode in her long-running campaign for clemency from President Trump. And President Trump could end that today. He could rule out clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell, the monster. He could rule out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell, the monster. The question for all of us today is why hasn't he done that, and why won't he do that?
Congressman James Walkinshaw, Democrat from Virginia, speaking to reporters on Capitol Hill. Other Democratic members of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee joined him, including Melanie Stansberry of New Mexico and Jasmine Crockett of Texas, who were asked about the survivors of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein's abuse.
What is your message to survivors amid this sort of wall of silence that we've seen today from Ghislaine Maxwell?
Our message to survivors is that we are here to bear witness, to fight for justice, and to fight for convictions.
Yeah, I mean, we're standing with them. We have been in communication with those survivors that are really, there are a certain number of survivors that are really more involved than others, and they are standing for their fellow other survivors. They're out front. We are standing with them, and we are telling them that we're not going to back down, which is why we're very clear about the fact that, yes, this took place today, and basically Ghislaine was like, I'm not going to participate, but we're not going to stop. You know, there were those that thought we would stop when we were able to get the discharge petition done. There were those that thought we were going to stop when it didn't seem like we had the votes once we finally got that done. I mean, the House Speaker shut the House down so that we would not go there, right? And now that they have violated the law, because this is actually in law, we are not stopping. So I want people to understand that House Democrats, we are going to be on their asses. Like, that's just the reality.
And what is your message to President Trump in that case?
Same thing. We're going to be on his ass. I mean, you know, it is so, I don't really know where we are in this country. Why are we even having this conversation? The United States is falling apart right now, partially because he's going out and randomly allowing for the killings of people in the middle of the street. But the other part of it is that we have a 34-count convicted felon, and there are people that are still shielding him from any type of accountability as it relates to a child sex trafficking ring. It is time to take the blinders off. Like, I don't understand why we are pretending like any of this is normal. And I think that that is the level of frustration that so many people are bringing, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, specifically to the Epstein file situation. Because right now, we know that they were willing to try to throw the Clintons in prison for not showing up, yet they won't even allow us to bring other people into committee who we know are mentioned in these files and mentioned so much more. When we went through the hearing as it relates to the Clintons, I said, listen, we know that Donald Trump's name is mentioned more. Bring him in too. Like, I'm not saying that this should be partisan. This should be whoever. I want to be clear about that. For the Democrats, this isn't partisanship. This is about right versus wrong.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Democrat from Texas. You also heard from Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, Democrat from New Mexico, speaking to reporters today. Today is also the first day that members of Congress got a chance to view the unredacted versions of the 3 million redacted Epstein files. The documents recently released in a secure room at the Justice Department. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, did just that and then spoke to reporters back on Capitol Hill.
We didn't want to see any redactions of the names of co-conspirators, accomplices, enablers, abusers, rapists, simply to spare them potential embarrassment, political sensitivity, or disgrace of some kind. And yet, nonetheless, the Epstein file documents that were released are filled with redactions of names and information about people who clearly are not victims and may fall into that other category. So I went over there and I was able to determine, at least I believe, that there were tons of completely unnecessary redactions in addition to the failure to redact the names of victims, and so that's troubling to us.
Did you see names of any potential co-conspirators that were redacted?
Well, I saw the names of lots of people who were redacted for mysterious or baffling or inscrutable reasons.
Are any of them well-known individuals?
For example, Mr. Wexner, his name was redacted from a government document, and I couldn't understand the logic of that. He was not a victim, and his name has appeared other places. Now, the Department of Justice has not sent forth its so-called privilege log, so it's not explained yet why there might be certain redactions that have been made. I saw one document which was an email that was sent by Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell, which was the forward of an email that he had received from some of his lawyers giving an account of a conversation between Epstein lawyers and Trump lawyers and others about what had taken place during that 2009 period. It was during the period of the 2009 investigation. And Epstein's lawyers synopsized and quoted Trump as saying that that Jeffrey Epstein was not a member of his club at Mar-a-Lago, but he was a guest at Mar-a-Lago, and he had never been asked to leave. And that was redacted for some indeterminate, inscrutable reason. I know it seems to be at odds with some things that President Trump has been saying recently about how he had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club or asked him to leave, and this was at least one report that appears to contradict it.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, speaking to reporters on Capitol Hill. Both Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, and Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, who a Fox News article calls the bipartisan duo who spearheaded the push to pass the Epstein Files Transparency Act last year, say they will view the unredacted files today. Congressman Massie on Sunday asked constituents to tell him what documents he should be focusing on, and Congressman Khanna writing, "We will not rest until the Epstein class is brought to justice." Also, the Epstein files fallout reaching Great Britain. AP writing that King Charles III is ready to support UK police examining claims that the former Prince Andrew gave confidential information to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, Buckingham Palace said on Monday. You're listening to Washington Today. From the Hill, Congress is running out of time to avert a shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, an effort that is increasingly fraught as bipartisan negotiations fizzle. A funding package passed earlier this week included a 2-week stopgap measure for DHS funding at 2025 levels through February 13th. Lawmakers have until that deadline to strike a deal for the full year 2026 bill, agree to another stopgap to buy more time to negotiate, or allow a shutdown that would affect a wide swath of agencies that fall under DHS's purview. Democrats are demanding reforms to how the Trump administration conducts immigration enforcement and have sent Republicans a series of demands, while also vowing not to support another short-term funding extension. Republicans are insisting most of those demands are non-starters. That was the article from The Hill. Here's the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor.
Funding for the Department of Homeland Security runs out on Friday. Over the weekend, the Trump administration and congressional Democrats engaged in meaningful talks on a path forward. And Democrats have made their demands known in detail. Some of them are positive starting points for further discussion. Others are non-starters and unnecessarily tie the hands of law enforcement. In the coming days, the administration and Democrats will need to work out their differences. And I expect that the Trump administration, with the full backing of congressional Republicans, will continue to resist any effort to make it harder for law enforcement to detain and deport dangerous illegal aliens, which is what many of the Democrats' demands would do. And I expect that the administration, again, with the backing of Republicans here in Congress, will insist on reforms of its own. I expect that those will include changes aimed at protecting federal law enforcement officers who are increasingly under threat from an organized and well-funded campaign to undermine immigration enforcement efforts. Equally important is addressing cooperation, or the lack thereof, between local and federal law enforcement. Too many jurisdictions prohibit local police from cooperating with immigration enforcement, a policy that not only defies common sense, but makes things more dangerous for everyone. And so I hope that my Democrat colleagues are prepared to talk about these and other issues. Mr. President, as in any good faith negotiation, there will be some back and forth. We've already seen the Trump administration act in good faith. Last week, Tom Homan announced an agreement to draw down 700 federal agents in Minnesota, something made possible thanks to increased cooperation from local law enforcement. The Trump administration has already said it will deploy body cameras to all officers deployed in Minneapolis. And as I've mentioned before, Republicans previously agreed to provide additional money for body cameras and de-escalation training for immigration and customs enforcement officers in a bipartisan, full-year Homeland Security bill. But Democrats reneged on that deal. Going forward, it is my hope that Democrats will work constructively and honor their commitments, because Republicans are serious about getting this funding bill done. That's one of the reasons we wanted to provide more time for negotiations. We're just a few days away from the deadline that Democrats chose, and it's very possible we won't have our work finished by then. If Democrats are serious about finding a solution here, they may need to find more time to bring these efforts to a productive conclusion. Mr. President, a government shutdown, even one that affects just one agency, is not in anybody's interest, least of all that of the hardworking Americans who staff these agencies and the American people who depend on their important work.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, also spoke about the Homeland Security Department funding situation and reform to immigration enforcement.
Mr. President, on Saturday, Senate and House Democratic leadership, including myself and Leader Jeffries, sent legislative text detailing the 10 items we outlined in our letter, which has been public since Thursday, for reining in ICE. We sent them to our Republican counterparts, including Leader Thune, Speaker Johnson, and the White House. So since Saturday, the ball has been in the Republicans' court. We have no idea of which of our proposals they will accept and which they reject. And when I say that Democrats offered exceedingly reasonable proposals and have the support of the American people, I'm not exaggerating. In fact, many on both sides who have seen our proposals say they're reasonable. We're asking, and they're reasonable for one obvious reason. We're asking ICE to do nothing more than follow the standards that the vast majority of law enforcement agencies already follow. Why should ICE be different, especially when they have such a record of brutality? We're simply saying no barging into people's homes without a judicial warrant. Who on the other side objects to that? No secret police wearing masks with zero identification. Who has police officers in their own jurisdictions who don't have any identification and are not identified at all? Of course not. That's perfectly reasonable. It's how we do law enforcement. I asked Republicans, when have they ever seen a traffic cop wearing a mask? Democrats also say no use of force without a code of conduct. Well, I hope people listen to this. Our proposed language for use of force is based off language currently in effect in the state of Florida. If it's good enough for Florida law enforcement, it certainly should be good enough for Republicans in Congress. Florida hardly is a state run by Democrats. We also cannot have unannounced raids in places like hospitals and elementary schools and polling places. Republicans should ask people back home if they think it's okay for ICE to tail school buses or to have ICE surround the polls, quote unquote, like Steve Bannon and others say. Most Americans would say this has nothing to do with going after criminals and everything to do with intimidation, coercion, and trying to jaundice our election process. Well, Republicans, the clock is ticking. We have sent you our proposals, and they are exceedingly reasonable. I hope our colleagues on the other side, many who, at least here in the Senate, recognize that things need to change, show they're ready to act in a meaningful way.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader on the Senate floor. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Mika Solner, Bloomberg government White House reporter, about the Homeland Security Department funding deadline.
Funding for DHS runs out this Friday at midnight. ICE reforms discussions on Capitol Hill seem to be at a standstill. What are you hearing from the White House? And if you think that White House officials or President Trump personally will get involved?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the White House has been not super vocal when it comes to the Democrats' demands that they laid out. House and Senate Republicans have taken shots at the list of demands that Democrats are demanding on ICE. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for the White House, said last week that they will start engaging with Democrats in order to reach DHS funding, which expires on Friday. So we're going to see more this week. I think that there's going to be a lot of talks between Capitol Hill leaders and the White House, but there's been little in terms of public input of some of the demands listed by Democrats, which includes banning of face coverings, as well as the implementation of warrants and other things to change the way that ICE has its protocols right now.
And do you think that the White House is motivated to make a deal, or do they feel like the politics are on their side?
I think it can be a mixed bag. I think the White House is extremely cognizant of the consequences if DHS does not get funded in terms of its impact on Border Patrol officials and even the Coast Guard. The press secretary laid that out last week as well. But I also think that, they're standing firm on their policies when it comes to their efforts to deport individuals here who are in the country illegally, and they have not softened on those positions. Yet I think that a lot of the staff internally within the White House is very aware as well of some of the public pushback they're getting, especially in the wake of the Minnesota shootings prompted by ICE.
Mika Solner, Bloomberg government White House reporter on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning, and Jake Sherman, Punchbowl News founder, posting on X late afternoon. The White House has sent Democrats a counterproposal on DHS reforms. Democrats sent a 10-point proposal for changes to federal immigration enforcement last week. White House has now responded. More soon. And there was a story from Politico that Senate Republicans expect to begin taking procedural steps Monday to set up consideration of a DHS funding patch. Senate aides still hope there's a way to prevent a DHS shutdown, and progress in negotiations could dictate how easy it is to get bipartisan buy-in for another CR. Most Democrats will be reluctant to punt unless the Senate does the unexpected and clears a new CR for DHS by Wednesday. There probably won't be enough time for the House to follow suit before the shutdown deadline. House Republican leaders have no plans to cancel next week's recess absent clear proof of progress in the Senate, meaning a DHS shutdown could take even longer to resolve. That was from Politico. This is Washington Today. The House today debated a bill designed to increase the number of affordable homes available. It's titled the Housing for the 21st Century Act and comes up under suspension of the rules procedures. That means a 2/3 vote to pass and no amendments allowed. Realtor.com writing about this bill. It proposes new rules to streamline reviews, exempt some smaller developments from certain requirements, and modernize local development and housing programs. It also expands financing for manufactured and affordable housing, including provisions for the financing of multifamily homes, and proposes reforms for housing, counseling, and financial literacy programs. Finally, it requires more reporting and study on barriers to housing, especially for the elderly and disabled, and mandates more oversight of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and public housing agencies. That was from Realtor.com. Congressman French Hill, Republican from Arkansas, the Financial Services Committee chair, supported the bill on the House floor.
Americans across our nation have faced the tough reality of out-of-control costs because of the recent spike in inflation coming out of the pandemic. President Trump has prioritized addressing affordability, and the Financial Services Committee has been working on solutions in our committee's area of jurisdiction. Alongside Ranking Member Waters, Chairman Flood of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, Ranking Member Mr. Cleaver of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, together we have introduced the Housing for the 21st Century Act to deliver a straightforward approach to housing, building more homes, removing barriers standing in the way with an eye towards driving down that marginal cost of a new unit. Housing 21 will streamline approvals and simplify federal and local housing process to give rural and urban communities the tools they need to build homes faster. And importantly, our bill helps banks access stable deposit funding, streamlines the exam process that's tailored particularly for our vital community banks, and helps promote more community banks to do what they do best: lend locally, support their communities. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us know on this House floor, without our community banks, without vigorous lending, homes don't get built. Our communities and regional banks play a key role in that housing construction ecosystem.
Congressman French Hill, Republican from Arkansas, chair of the Financial Services Committee on the House floor. The ranking Democrat on the committee, Maxine Waters of California, also supported the bill.
Our housing and homelessness crisis has reached a breaking point as millions of Americans each night struggle to find a decent and stable and affordable place to live. The struggle has real faces of our children's, teachers, working mothers, veterans, and of course, children from all over the country. And this struggle is in our rural towns, urban areas, and suburban neighborhoods across America. On any given night, 800,000 people are experiencing homelessness in the United States of America. Rents nationwide have soared by 47%, and home prices have skyrocketed 57%. Incomes haven't kept pace with these increases, which means housing eats up more and more of a family's paycheck. As the lead Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, it has been my mission to fight to end this homeless and housing crisis. And the Housing for the 21st Century Act is a critical first step in that mission.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, ranking member on the Financial Services Committee on the House floor. The House will be voting on this bill tonight. Again, it's being brought up under suspension of the rules procedures, which means no amendments allowed, a 2/3 vote needed to pass. Wall Street today, the Dow up 20, NASDAQ up 207, and S&P up 32. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. begins a Washington Examiner article, ramped up his condemnation of ultra-processed foods during an event at the Heritage Foundation on Monday. Kennedy spoke with Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts to celebrate 1 year of his tenure implementing the Make America Healthy Again agenda. In the conversation, he emphasized the importance of improving the American diet. The secretary said 70% of what children eat is considered ultra-processed, and it is killing them, he said, through metabolic dysfunction diseases such as diabetes and obesity. He said it's a spiritual warfare. It's a war at scale against cellular activity. It's an assault on children. That was reporting from the Washington Examiner. Here is part of the conversation at the Heritage Foundation.
We're trying to make it easier for parents to make good choices. We're not telling people what to do. We're not starting a nanny state. We're not, if you live in this country, you ought to be able to buy a Coca-Cola if you want one, or eat a Krispy Kreme donut. But we're going to tell you it's not good for you. And allow you to make your own choices. And that's really how democracy is supposed to function. And, parents need to be on their guard. Because we were told by the last administration, trust the experts. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. Right? I argued the Monsanto case, and they had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and I had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and they're saying two opposite things, depending on what their bias was. And so, trusting the experts is not a feature of democracy, and it's not a feature of science. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism, not of democracy. So in democracy, we need, my dad told me when I was a kid, people in authority lie. And, the government lies all the time, and it lied to us about the dietary guidelines for 50 years. It lies about everything. It lied about the Vietnam War. It lies about everything. And, we need to understand that. We need to support government, but we also need to have be in a posture eternally of fear, skepticism toward authority. And that's what it means. That's the civic duty of living in a democracy. And I say today it's harder to be a parent than at any time in history, because you're being assaulted by social media, and by your kids have their cell phones, and they have everything available on that cell phone. And they're being told to eat the worst foods. When you go to that checkout counter, you've got just an array of poison there, so that when you're pushing your baby through in the shopping cart, he's reaching out and grabbing the Twinkies, and then crying if he can't keep them. And so corporations and government have commoditized us. They're taking away our souls, and they're turning us into just eternal consumers. And the stuff that they're selling us is bad for us, almost all bad for us. And so, we need to approach life understanding that and teach our kids that lesson. Be skeptical. And these are all lies you're being told, and that you need to make up. In a democracy, we have a responsibility that people don't have in other systems. You need to make up your own mind and make good decisions for yourself and your children.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. today at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, marking 1 year as secretary. Associated Press reporting that a leading U.S. health official on Sunday urged people to get inoculated against the measles at a time of outbreaks across several states, and as the United States is at risk of losing its measles elimination status. Take the vaccine, please, said Dr. Mehmet Oz, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services administrator, whose boss has raised suspicion about the safety and importance of vaccines. He said, "We have a solution to our problem." The article goes on. Oz, a heart surgeon, defended some recently revised federal vaccine recommendations, as well as past comments from President Donald Trump and the nation's health chief, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., about the efficacy of vaccines. From Oz, there was a clear message on the measles. Not all illnesses are equally dangerous, and not all people are equally susceptible to those illnesses, he told CNN State of the Union. But measles is one. You should get your vaccine. Washington Today continues in a moment.
best ideas and best practices can be found anywhere.
We have to listen so we can govern better.
Democracy depends on heavy doses of civility.
You can fight and still be friendly.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
You know, you may not agree with a Democrat on everything, but you can find areas where you do agree.
He's a pretty likable guy as well.
Chris Coons and I are actually friends. He votes wrong all the time, but we're actually friends.
The horrible secret that Scott and I have is that we actually respect each other.
We all don't hate each other.
You two actually kind of like each other. These are the kinds of secrets we'd like to expose.
It's nice to be with a member who knows what they're talking about.
You guys did agree to the civility, all right?
He owes my son $10 from a bet.
He is never paid. Fork it over.
That's fighting words right there.
Glad I'm not in charge of it.
I'm thrilled to be on the show with him.
They're not shows like this, right? Incentivizing that relationship.
Ceasefire, Friday nights on C-SPAN.
Friday night at 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern, also available as a podcast. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From Reuters, Armenia and the United States agreed on Monday to cooperate in the civil nuclear sector as Washington sought to bolster ties with a former close ally of Russia, months after Washington brokered a peace agreement in the South Caucasus. A statement on the nuclear sector deal was signed by the Armenian Prime Minister and U.S. Vice President JD Vance, who was on a two-day visit to the country. Long heavily dependent on Russia and Iran for its energy supplies, Armenia is now reviewing proposals from U.S., Russian, Chinese, French, and South Korean companies to construct a new nuclear reactor to replace its sole aging Russian-built nuclear reactor. That was from Reuters. At a joint news conference, Vice President Vance noted that he's the first sitting vice president to visit the country.
What's happening here today is truly historic. I am proud to be the first vice president of the United States to visit this beautiful country. I'm very excited to get to see a little bit of it tomorrow. I'm very excited about the dinner that we're going to have. And I know that I'm the last thing standing between that dinner, so I'll try to speak very fast here over the closing couple of minutes. But this is one of the oldest Christian countries in the entire world, a true bedrock of Christian civilization and culture. As a devout Christian myself, I know the meaning of this country to the entire world and to the religion that the Prime Minister and I share. So to the people of Armenia and the great Prime Minister, I want to thank you for your partnership. President Trump is committed to this partnership, and so am I, and we're thrilled to be here to take the next step. God bless you.
Vice President JD Vance at a joint news conference with the Armenian Prime Minister in Armenia. During the Q&A, a reporter asked him about another subject, Iran. The Center Square writing that as the U.S. is in the midst of nuclear talks with Iran, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will visit the White House on Wednesday, according to Israeli officials. Talks between the U.S. and Iran have been ongoing in Oman since late last week, with tensions between the two nations growing. Israel is reportedly concerned with not only Iran rebuilding its nuclear program, but also ballistic missiles and support for proxy groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. That was the article from the Center Square. Here's the question to Vice President JD Vance in Armenia.
Mr. Vice President, on the Iran negotiations, would the U.S. allow limited uranium enrichment, or is no enrichment whatsoever a red line in negotiations?
Well, I think the president's going to make the ultimate determination about where we draw the red lines in the negotiations. If you go back to the original negotiation that happened between us and the Iranians, the president was trying very, very hard to actually strike a constructive deal that would have been good for the United States. But frankly, the entire administration agreed if the Iranians were smart enough to have made that agreement, then it would have been good for them too. We're obviously much more focused tonight on the issues related to U.S.-Armenia cooperation, but I'll let the president speak to exactly where he wants to set the lines of the negotiation. As you guys know, he typically does that privately. He doesn't announce what he's going to do in a negotiation because he thinks that it constrains him in private. He's going to have, I think, a lot of good conversations with his team and with others in the days and weeks to come. I'll let the president set the terms of those negotiations, but with all due respect to our friends in the media, I think the president is going to preserve decisional space for himself, and that means not revealing too many of his cards publicly.
I have one more follow-up on the Iran negotiations. Has the violent crackdown of protesters in Iran been part of those negotiations? Does the U.S. Want to push for any kind of human rights assurances to be part of a deal?
Well, I think as the president has said publicly, it's already very much been part of the negotiations that we've had. It's one of the things the president made a very strong demand is that there were prisoners who were going to be executed. The crackdown was, of course, very brutal and violent. And as the president and the entire administration has said, we stand with the people of Iran. We stand with the right of peaceful protest across the world, and certainly people who want to exercise that right in Iran. But absolutely, the president has made that part of the conversations that he's had, not just with the Iranians, but with people all across the region. I'm sure that will continue.
Vice President JD Vance at a news conference in Armenia with the Armenian Prime Minister. AFP writing a delegation of U.S. senators visited Greenland Monday to, quote, rebuild the trust shattered by President Donald Trump's threats to annex the Arctic island by force. Trump has caused alarm among European allies with his repeated hints at seizing the Danish autonomous territory. Last month, Trump partially backed off threats of military action, claiming he had agreed to a framework deal with NATO Chief Mark Rutte to ensure greater U.S. influence. A U.S.-Denmark-Greenland working group has been established to discuss Washington's ostensible security concerns in the Arctic, but details have not been made public. That was reporting from AFP. The U.S. Senate delegation traveling to Greenland included Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska, Democrats Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire and Gary Peters of Michigan, and Independent Angus King of Maine. They all held a news conference in Nuuk, Greenland. Here is Senator Murkowski.
Trust that has been built since World War II has been eroded and degraded. We need to work to rebuild that trust. That's why you see members of Congress that are here to remind you that, yes, our president may make certain statements, but we also, as Congress, have a role. We have a system of checks and balances. So how we exercise that, I think, is important for Greenlanders to know as well. Whether it is through the power of appropriations and authorizing or not authorizing spending, whether it is the value of exchanges that is so important in understanding one another, know that your Congress, our Congress, has a role in how we move forward with our friends in Greenland. I will end with one comment. We talk a lot about the transatlantic alliance and what that means from a NATO perspective and how important it is to continue that. I think more of the alliance as being a trans-Arctic alliance and what we as Arctic nations can be doing as we build the strength and security that benefits Greenland, that benefits the Kingdom of Denmark, that benefits Alaska and the United States. There is a shared interest that we must work together towards, and it begins and it ends with constructive, respectful dialogue.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, at a news conference in Greenland with 3 other U.S. senators. New York Times writing, for years, the United States was the only major country to run a full-time consulate in Greenland, and it isn't much, a little red house with an American flag poking out. But on Friday, a new French consul general swooped in, and Canada sent a delegation to celebrate the official opening of its own diplomatic post. That was from the New York Times. AP reporting that Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy former Hong Kong media tycoon and a fierce critic of Beijing, was sentenced on Monday to 20 years in prison, in the longest punishment given so far under a China-imposed national security law that has virtually silenced Hong Kong's dissent. This is Washington Today. President Donald Trump, writes Politico on Saturday, urged federal authorities to complete a proposed $6.2 billion merger between media companies Nexstar and Tegna, his latest effort to exert greater influence over the American media landscape, and one that's already ticked off a key conservative media company opposed to the deal. An agreement between the two companies would violate a rule from the Federal Communications Commission limiting how many television stations a single company can operate. Still, Trump cast it as critical for fighting his opponents in the national news arena. He wrote on Truth Social, "We need more competition against the enemy, the fake news national TV networks." But Newsmax, whose CEO Chris Ruddy has long stood against lifting the FCC cap, is signaling its strong opposition to the idea. The Nexstar deal means dangerous consolidation that will limit competition, harm conservative voices, and dramatically increase consumer cable bills, the company said in a statement Saturday. That was all from Politico. FCC Commissioner Anna Gomez, a Democrat, spoke about what she sees as dangerous consolidation of media ownership at today's Internet Education Foundation conference in Washington, D.C.
Broadcasters are navigating declining advertising revenue, competition from digital platforms, and changing consumer habits. These pressures are real, but how we respond to them matters. When consolidation becomes the default solution, it often accelerates the very decline it is supposed to address. Fewer owners does not just mean fewer balance sheets, it means fewer independent editorial decisions and fewer local perspectives. I hear this concern directly from people in communities already experiencing the effects of consolidation. I recently received an email from a consumer describing how a single corporate owner controls or operates most of the major broadcast affiliates in their local market. On paper, viewers appear to have multiple local news options, but many of those stations share the same reporters, crews, anchors, and often the same stories. So while several stations may carry local news programming each night, there are really only one or two independent editorial voices. Now that may look like choice, but in practice, it leaves viewers with fewer places to turn for independent coverage of what is happening in their own backyard. And the concern is not limited to individual communities. A recent national poll found that nearly 3 out of 4 likely voters oppose large broadcast corporations buying or merging with local TV stations, with broad majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and independents rejecting proposals to loosen media ownership rules. And this is not the only concern. We have also seen the FCC use its regulatory power to pressure coverage in ways that are favorable to this administration, including recent suggestions that broadcasters could face regulatory consequences based on the content of the network's late-night comedy. After days of bipartisan pushback against this weaponization of government power, the corporate parent ultimately backed off. But several days later, the large corporate behemoths that own vast numbers of local stations across the country did not. These billion-dollar media companies have significant business before the FCC. They need regulatory approval for transactions, and they are actively seeking to reduce the regulatory guardrails so they can grow even larger. That reality leaves local stations trapped in the middle as corporate owners weigh regulatory risk against editorial independence and impose their will and their values on communities they may never meaningfully engage with. As media ownership becomes more concentrated, this pressure will only grow. The incentive to avoid conflict can quietly override the obligation to serve a local audience.
FCC Commissioner Anna Gomez, a Democrat, at today's Internet Education Foundation conference in Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump's Religious Liberty Commission held its 5th hearing today. The focus was anti-Semitism and its threats to religious liberty. The meeting was held at the Museum of the Bible in Washington. Here's a few minutes of it. Commission member Carrie Prejean Bowler questioning Seth Dillon, Babylon Bee CEO, and Leo Terrell, chair of the Justice Department's task force to combat anti-Semitism.
Seth, I know you're big on free speech. Babylon Bee wouldn't exist if you didn't have freedom of speech, and I'm full supportive of that. You said platforms are an issue, which I assume you're referring to X. Are you saying that Elon and heads of platforms need to censor speech that they determine as anti-Semitic? And if so, by what definition do they censor? Would that definition censor this verse from the Bible? The Jews who killed both the Lord Jesus and their own prophets and drove us out and don't please God and are contrary to all men. 1 Thessalonians 2:14.
I think you may have
I think he should be removed. I think he should be removed.
Excuse me, we will not have outbursts from the audience. If there's a further outburst, I will ask you to leave.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, you're out. Please escort this gentleman. We will not be interrupted.
Thank you. We're having a discussion. It's very important.
I think you may have misheard what I said about platforms. I said platforms are not the problem. Promotion is the problem. So what I advocate for I actually personally advocated for Nick Fuentes to be reinstated on X when Elon took it over. Not because I like what he has to say, but because I love that he has the right to say it. So even these ideas that I steadfastly oppose, I think the solution to them is to push back on them. Better speech, more speech, good speech in response to bad speech. So you may have just misunderstood what I was saying there about the platforms.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. And then, Leo, thank you so much for being here. What anti-Semitic actions have taken place? I've heard a lot of examples of harmful words and protests, but aren't we free in this nation to have the right to protest, protected by the First Amendment? As I said, Seth, you love free speech, as do I. So words are protected. What I'm concerned about is what further legislation do we need around free speech?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. I've been a civil rights attorney 35 years. I am a strong believer in free speech. You will not have me challenge anyone's right to speak. I support Seth on that. But when you match speech with conduct, criminal conduct, such as blocking access to someone's right to go to school, along with the speech, then you cross a line where there may be a criminal activity where the affirmative defense of free speech no longer exists. We had a lot of discussion about a school that I'm embarrassed that I went to, UCLA Law School. We heard what was going on. I was sitting there cringing because it was true. And we had people who were block access. Speech, I'm all good for that. Going back to what I originally said, all those charges in which the line was crossed, where it went from speech to conduct, believe it or not, the local prosecutor dismissed all those charges, the criminal charges. So that's why I'm saying this problem is really on a local level. But I will support anyone's right on speech. It's when they match it with conduct that might cross the line and would be considered criminal in and of itself.
But aren't there already laws to protect that?
Well, you never heard me say in my presentation, there are existing laws that should be utilized. I'm not talking about creating new laws.
Leo Terrell, chair of the Justice Department's Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, an exchange there with Carrie Prejean Bowler, a member of the Religious Liberty Committee created by President Trump. You also heard from Seth Dillon, Babylon Bee CEO. You can find today's meeting in its entirety at our video library at cspan.org. It's a story from USA Today. A group of multi-faith organizations sued President Donald Trump's administration over what they contend is an illegal lack of religious and ideological diversity on the Department of Justice's Religious Liberty Commission. Interfaith Alliance and its president and CEO, the Reverend Paul Rushenbush, along with Muslims for Progressive Values, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and Hindus for Human Rights are named as plaintiffs in the lawsuit, which was filed in U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. That was from USA Today. As part of the celebration this year of America's 250th birthday, the House today joined the Senate in passing the Semi-Quincentennial Congressional Time Capsule Act, which directs the architect of the Capitol to create and bury a time capsule in the Capitol Visitors Center by July 4th of this year, and it wouldn't be opened for another 250 years. Congresswoman Stephanie Bice, Republican from Oklahoma, supported it on the House floor.
Amidst our toughest challenges of the day, this legislation reminds us that we can all work together. Under the bill, leaders from both parties will work alongside the architect of the Capitol to compile the capsule's contents. This will include a letter from congressional leadership, books, manuscripts, relics, memorabilia, and more. I'm optimistic that the contents of this capsule will reflect what makes this country great, as well as the challenges we face during this time.
Congresswoman Stephanie Bice, Republican from Oklahoma, also supporting the bill. Congressman Joseph Morelli, Democrat from New York.
The items in the capsule will be determined by bipartisan, bicameral congressional leaders and include written materials relating to the anniversary representations of notable legislative and institutional milestones, and a message from this Congress to our future colleagues in the 244th Congress. I did say last year I'd hope to be there at the opening. I'm not sure that's possible, but I'm going to do everything I can. But this year's celebration of America's anniversary offers an opportunity to reflect on the resilience of the American experiment. Our nation has faced countless tests to our strength and our unity, including a civil war, 2 world wars, natural disasters, and more. Yet through each of these profound challenges, this country has endured and continued to strive toward the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago. During this time of deep division and heightened partisanship, this anniversary reminds us of our shared responsibility to uphold the values of liberty and equality that have defined this nation for 2.5 centuries.
Congressman Joseph Morelli, Democrat from New York, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by voice vote, sending it to the president. Also passed another bill by voice vote to have the Treasury Department mint collectible and circulating $2.50 coins to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, sending that bill to the Senate. Florida today facing high offshore winds along the SpaceX Dragon's projected flight path up the Atlantic seaboard. NASA has pushed back the Falcon 9 rocket launch carrying the Crew 12 astronauts one day to Thursday, February 12th. The news conference was held today at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The crew, 2 Americans, 1 French, 1 Russian, are going to the International Space Station to replace 4 crew members who cut their mission short and returned to Earth last month because of a medical issue. And today a reporter asked Steve Stitch, who is the Commercial Crew Program Manager, and Dina Contella, Deputy Manager of the ISS, about any changes to how NASA prepares for medical emergencies.
Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. Thanks for all doing this, and good luck. My question actually is for all 3 of you. You mentioned, Andreas, this new ultrasound device. So a question I've had for a while since the Crew 11 medical evacuation is, are you guys reevaluating what medicines and what medical devices you should have on board the ISS? And would your device have helped Crew 11 at all in analyzing whatever was wrong? Thanks.
Why don't I just kick us off here? I think I'll take it. But I'll just say, we are continually looking at the various risks on board. What are the risks medically for our crew members? There's a large programmatic risk associated with having to bring home crews early, and we're just continually looking at the complement of equipment that we have on board. So there is the specific item that he's talking about is more of an experiment to see about remote guidance and that type of thing. It's not specifically something that we are manifesting on board for any particular risk. It's more just overall risk, I'd say, reduction for multiple things. Understanding blood flow in space is critical because it doesn't operate quite exactly the same. We're just continually looking at all the various risks, and so his remote guidance types of techniques are important for exploration. Really, there's not been a very specific targeted something associated with his device that is going to be used associated with that return.
And I would just say I watch the ISS program operate all the time, and they're trying to all the time look at the risk of the human body in space. If you just think about the population on Earth, everybody in this room has a little different blood physiology. Everybody has a little bit different metabolism. Everybody's different, and drugs work differently on all of us here. And so if you think about what we're doing right now in ISS, flying more and more people, you get a wider population of how people behave in microgravity for these long-duration flights. We tend to try to fly more and more diagnostic capability to augment what we have here on the ground. Here we have wonderful medical capability, but again, for Mars someday, we're going to need these long-duration flights where people are in microgravity for over a year. And so ISS is really a pathfinder for that.
Steve Stitch, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager, and Dina Contella, Deputy Manager of the International Space Station Program, part of today's news conference at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the latest happening in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.